Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked Fly Fishing, and today we're going to look at fishing two types of jigs that I will be producing movies for, on how to tie them, how to put them together. And this is how to fish them. We're doing that first, and then I'll put in the cards later when these videos come up for publication. So what I've got out right now is two jigs. One is based on my Twitch fly, one is based on my Weimer series. The Twitch, we call it Twitch Jig and the Minnow Jig, basically. And they're designed to be fished in different ways. And this particular video is where I went out on the Grand River and conditions were less than ideal. The river was about 25% higher than normal and it was muddied up. And not a lot, but it was muddied up enough that we couldn't see the structure. And that was the issue for our fishing, whether we're using flies or jigs or whatever. It's helpful to be able to see the structure because this river goes in ridges and troughs. So a ridge might be 6 inches to a foot deep, and a trough might be 3 feet, maybe even more in depth. So you want to be fishing the trough, and the Twitch fly or the Twitch jig is perfect for that kind of fishing. Generally, I would be casting slightly upstream. I'm working it back to me. So let's start off and see how this went. And it was less than desirable. So there's the Twitch jig, and here's the Twitch fly. And you notice I'm casting slightly upstream and across. I'm just working the fly back, and I'm in deep water. And where I'm standing, though, is quite shallow. So I'm casting from shallow water into the deeper feature, and I could see it. The water was clear enough for me able to see where the deep holes were and where the shallow water was. And you stay in the shallow water so as not to spook the fish. So that was a half decent little bass on the Twitch fly. So I'm casting exactly the same thing, only tied on a jig, and I'm not doing it the same way. I'm casting downstream. Well, I did pick up a fish doing it, but it's not the ideal way to fish this particular jig. I was casting downstream and retrieving it across, hoping for the best because I couldn't see the structure. I couldn't see where the troughs were. And, you know, so there's a downstream presentation, and it's not the best. So here's what I should be doing. There's a trough behind me, so cast across and work the trough. And you can see if you just pull it in current, there's not a whole lot going on. They want those rubber legs to be popping out, closing down. So I'm trying to work this without being able to see the structure, and of course I got hung up. And this happened all day. I kept hanging up because I couldn't see the structure. I'm casting into shallow water, and you know, it was going to be a real nuisance. Here I'm casting on a trough upstream, and bang, hung up. This gives you an idea. I waited out to one hang up, and there's my Twitch jig in about 6-8 inches of water. You know, that's what I'm dealing with. So what I should have been using the whole time was the Minnow Jig, which is designed to swim fairly high up in the water current. It's not meant to be bounced along the bottom like the Twitch Jig. This thing fishes like a typical streamer or bucktail in fly fishing, and it doesn't get very deep. The head of this is not lead, it's a white metal. So it weighs the same as the head on the Twitch Jig, but it's a lot bigger. And it has a slope to it as well, which we can look at. And you see the slope on the front of that head? That means it's going to bounce off of any rocks it hits. I mean, its rate of hookup, or snagging, I should say, on rocks is a lot lower than a regular jig because of it's both lighter and it tends to skid up when it hits something. So you saw the depth of that ridge, which in total was probably 6 to 12 inches, depending where it was. But I can run this Minnow Jig right over that without worrying about it. If I touch a rock, I'll bounce off of it, but most of the time I would just go right across them. And so it's up here in the water column versus the bass, and the bass are down here, but they have no trouble seeing it against the sky, and they'll come up and take it, no problem. They're seeing the white belly of this thing. So I took this out, and I put it on much too late. So here I'm casting down and across, and that's not a snag. That's a decent bass. And all I'm doing the whole time is just fishing this casting across the current, slightly downstream, retrieving it back. And, you know, I landed this one, had a couple of misses. I didn't fish for very long, maybe half an hour. But it gives you an idea of what the jig will do. And here's what it looks like when it's slicked down. So I did do a few casts upstream and just, I wouldn't say burn it back, but I brought it back fairly quickly. And you notice my rod tip, it just a little movement to give the jig a little jerk. I'm not trying to make it do this. I'm just making it dart a little bit, which is what minnows do. They tend to dart when they swim. They don't just swim in a straight line. And now this is a down and across presentation. And the same idea, just a small, keeping the rod tip low and just moving it. And there's a difference. I'll just stop it there. There's the difference in rod position between this Twitch jig, which I had to keep the rod tip high to try and keep it from snagging up all the time, and the Minnow Jig, which I didn't have to worry about snag so much, and I could keep the rod tip low. And I was also working the rod and the jig to a much greater degree with the Twitch jig, and I was, you know, giving it little snaps to make it dance, whereas all I'm doing with the Minnow Jig is just these little darts, little pulses. And I don't want it doing this. I just want it changing speed slightly, and the marabou will open and close a little bit when you do that. So all in all, it was not a great day. I mean, the water conditions are far from ideal, but what I'm sort of pointing out here is, you know, how to use the Minnow Jig and the Twitch Jig for fishing, what you should be doing with them and what you shouldn't be doing with them. And ideally, if we'd seen the structure, I would have been able to fish it effectively with the Twitch Jig, fish it properly, which is mostly upstream, not down. And I wouldn't have to even gotten the Minnow Jig out. But with these kinds of, you know, fishing conditions, I should have been using the Minnow Jig right from the start. But I did want to get some video footage of the Twitch Jig in action, so I lived with it for an hour or so. Anyway, so that's kind of idea of fishing these two jigs, two different approaches. One's classic jig, bouncing along the bottom, and the other one is fished in a way that you don't normally think of with jigs, which is fairly high up in the water column and pretty well a straight run with a little darting motion. No up and down, just straight. Fish more like a paddle tail soft plastic swim bait. And it catches fish. I mean, that's what we do with the fly rod. That's what we do with streamers and bucktails. Exactly that. And it catches fish all of the time. So bottom line here is that when you're putting jigs together, just don't go out and fish them always the same way under the same conditions. Think about how you're employing them. Think about how you work structure, having to see the structure. And when you can't, when you want to do what we typically call a searching pattern, where we're just looking for fish and just casting blind, something like the Minnow Jig works a whole lot better than some of the other options out there. Especially if the water's clear. These types of jigs work best when the water has some clarity to it so the fish can see them, because they don't create a lot of commotion. They're not like a paddle tail. Now, ideally in these conditions, I should have been using a soft plastic paddle tail. Probably would have picked up more fish, but I wanted to get these two jigs on video. Anyway, so that's it. So give that some thought. Clarity is important, depth is important, structure is important, current is important, and be prepared to pick the right jig for the right job. Cheers.